Hello, this is Carla Harryman reading for the Poetry Room. I'm going to begin by reading a section from a memory play. So I'm also a playwright in the mode of poets theater. Many of my works are oriented toward performance. And in respect to the event that brings me here, I've decided to do something that relates to an influence that one could consider a literary influence if one considers one's children literary influences. And so the end of the part that I'm reading from memory play is a collaboration between my son and me when I was 7 years old. And so I'm going to, and the character that I'm focusing on is the child in memory play. It's a fabulist play, and there are reptiles and pelicans and fish in it, and most of what I'm reading is going to focus on the child and pelican. But I'm going to begin as the child falls asleep. We're in a little tent town out in the salt flats where there's a bedtime story happening, and the child falls asleep to a recording of William Blake's Songs of Innocence. I am set to light the ground while the beetle goes his round. Follow now the beetle's hum, little wanderer, hie thee home. And then I'm skipping to near the end of the play, Act 2, Scene 2. We return to the location of Act 1, Scene 2, with the child waking up now where she had fallen asleep next to the tape recorder. But the child's waking is deceptive. There are ghosts or deceptions all around. Pelican, I lost something. Child, what do you mean? What I said. Where is my mother? Have you seen your mother lately? I want my mother. What if I said, she's my mother? You talk too much. It's time for you to help me. What's that in your mouth? You look heavy. Pelican, you look hungry. Do you like what you're doing? My plant's gone. I'm very concerned. I can pick one for you. What kind? Not that kind of factory. But that's my house. Well, it used to be right there. I don't remember. You can't remember. You lost your plant before I was born. I have a father. Who's your father? I've never met your father. He doesn't have to be here. I wish he were. If we're friends, then we're not in the same family. We're in different families. Where is your family? How'd you like to make a trade? I don't like trades. Nothing? You tell me a story, and I'll tell you a story. Child, I'll tell you a story, and you have to do what I tell. Once upon a time, there were only little groups of people living on berries and other stuff. Do you remember what? Pelican, roots, fish like that? Now you go over there and eat berries. I didn't say I'd do it. That's our trade. I tell you a story and you act it out. I didn't agree. It won't be difficult. Don't worry. Just go over there and eat the berries. Pelican pretends to follow the child's instructions, but as the child speaks, Pelican sneaks away. Child, everybody was eating berries, but someone invented magnifying glasses. They could burn things faster with magnifying glasses, and they could see details that some people say we were never meant to see. They built houses like common houses, you know them, And they kept the magnifying glasses in the common houses, and people would go in them when they were sick or happy. They took the magnifying glasses with them on hunting expeditions, too. They liked to look at the berries, which were hairy, in the magnifying glasses, and the sun can burn your eyes, and they looked at their wounds healing, and they would make up things to look at like toys with teensy seed designs on them, and they would play. They got really good at sewing because they could make things very small. Even before history, we were preparing for the invention of microchips, but they didn't need microchips, and they didn't have pollution. They wanted to see things that were different than what they'd already seen. The way they started wanting this is when they realized that when you look through a magnifying glass, things look different, and somehow they got this idea that if things that are already there can change because of what you see with them, then the thing you see through changes what's already there, and so you can also change things into different things that you don't know about, using some other kind of invention that you don't know about. They thought things that don't exist could exist if they could figure out how to make them, but also that they already existed, but they just didn't know how to make them yet. Like they were already there, but they couldn't see them. So let's pretend my house is your factory, okay? You go over there. So my theme for this reading are works that have to do with childhood, which is actually something I have wanted to do for a long time, is to look a little bit at this whole thread in my writing, which pops up quite a bit. And so I thought this was a really great opportunity. And also my son just turned 40, and I'm on the way to celebrate his 40th birthday. And so I thought somehow or another this all came together, and I thought, okay, I'm going to focus on this for this reading. And so this is from my book, Baby. It was published by Adventures in Poetry, so in 2005, and this is a book that I've always been very fond of. It's at a different moment technologically, and sometimes it sounds like it really is, even though it was published in 2005, from a different time. But I will begin now with some readings of these prose poems in Baby. Now, word technology. Now, word technology. These were words she would learn someday. In the meantime, she was fire in the womb with a skirt, then a shirt, which she pulled up through a small door that people on the other side called a cervical opening. Oh, hallowed name and jittery shirt. She listened to a tiger reading files. She wanted to know what a tiger looks like first, before she wanted to know what anything else looked like. Someone, had that someone known anything about what Baby wanted, would have said authoritatively, it's the sound of the parent's voice you anticipate, desire, and suck in all at once through those perfect mitten ears and translucent and batted at things, pulled red, then formed into conch spindles, then later shielded by hands from undesirable noise. The tiger opened a file claiming, this is the beginning of a long story, which is everything Baby wanted except the shirt she rolled up and over and in and by with for her skirt. The corner of everything was smitten with attentiveness. The difference between a womb and a room lies in such corners of attentiveness or the technology of listening. Then apostrophe curve, sheaves of paper made from non-tree pulp, but some new ecologically remunerative fiber rained on the floor. So many it was like a waterfall, and the tiger kept reading the story from them as they dropped. Willowy, clamorous sounds in roaring nights, those adjectives kept the tiger's voice thick with stalled thought. The tiger was not an impatient reader, but her paws took unkindly to text. Some sheaves pierced through the claws, which would dart out when words such as such and entombment and liver and out fell out of her slobbering lips. This was an embarrassment, almost worse than incontinence, in the tiger universe, which prided itself in controlling the claw's revolt. The claws would have perfect timing. This was the first spiritual law of the tiger. The story was about the possessive, to embrace for a very long time until the other finds her place in your fur, purr, purr. Baby, can you hear me? Baby had fallen asleep against the curve of her mother's spine. Thus, the tiger was able to hide her indignity and continue with her long recitation. How much, one might ask, did Baby still know of this primordial shame when years later and into adulthood she challenged the first spiritual law, the one that admonished the tiger to hide and control her claws? Baby had asked aloud, if the claw has a spontaneous life of its own, how are we to understand its nature if it must be subject to one unyielding law? You are well on your way to anarchy, was the answer, which came from the world of things. Humiliated, she hung her head and held her arched feet and long toes upright in a universe of things. Mostly, the things were still indistinct. Words surfaced and bright, but an old rattle, blue as a cucumber, held out its hand, and Baby foraged in the hand's mitt and nestled there for what seemed like another 100 years or so. Artifact. Once, said the tiger, the forest was angry. What forest? Asked Baby. I'll tell you soon. Hang on. Once the forest was angry, and thought balloons melted inside it. What were balloons doing in the forest? I'll tell you in a minute. One of the thought balloons had said, the water is getting too close. When the thought balloons melted because a forest's anger can sometimes melt a thought balloon, the water in the balloon's thoughts surrounded the trees. Why didn't the water sink into the ground? The ground was already wet, very wet. The ground was so wet that the water couldn't sink quickly. The trees were angry, and now they were getting sick. Where did they hurt? Trees feel everything all over. They get mad and drop their leaves. Some of them began to drop their leaves. Where was the forest? The forest was way up north. Use your finger and point that way. The baby was standing up in her crib, which she had more or less outgrown but liked to be in it now that she knew how to get out. A reaching, padded paw surrounded then covered Baby's pudgy fist, which seemed as putty for the paw. Claws as silky as ivory sweaters unfurled from the paw. These claws formed delicate pincers around Baby's index finger, then pulled carefully, uncurling the finger out from under her plump fist. As if they were showing the finger the key to the future, the claws directed it toward the window with the view of oak trees. That's north. Something insurmountable woke Baby from her sensual trance. She grabbed her own index finger with her opposite thumb, making of her thumb a vice for the finger. She proceeded to study the finger as meticulously as would a tiger, rotating it in its socket and bending it back a little and then out. She then retracted her hand, holding it in close to her chest. Then the hand thrust outward with the index finger rigid as a pole pointing north. That way is north. So now north was now in her body forever. The open box. Baby, in another era, was running from room to room with her arm thrust out and her finger bent in a peculiar position. She was making a spluttering, buzzing sound, a black fly in the form of Baby, That ran splat right into the television set perched on a little stool, a stool Baby had used only yesterday. "What's that?" asked Baby, pointing at the TV screen. The tiger was there, ready to whisper in her ear, "It's a dungeon full of dirt." "Oh, Zizi," said Baby in wonderment, pulling at the knobs. Tiger realized too late Baby liked dungeons full of dirt, especially when description poured spontaneously out of Tiger's mouth. Baby loved the mouth of the tiger, especially its sweaty lips. So the TV, it was black and white, went pop on. Baby sat down on the floor with her entire hand in her mouth sucking on the hand, 4 and 5 fingers, in and out, while nutty adults in miniature did all sorts of things, talking in odd theatrical voices as if they were talking to air, and air could listen. The air has huge ears, thought Baby. She looked around all about her, but could only feel the air brushing lightly against her cheeks in that interstitial world between now and then. In the meantime, the jackpot hobnobbing of the nitwits and sad sacks on television had vanished. In front of her was an emaciated child with huge ribs and a terrible, listless look that frowned on Baby's chubby face. Baby fearlessly batted at the TV screen. "The baby's in the box. The baby's in the box. The baby's in the box. The box. Open the box now." Baby. Because this is the literature of ideas, I cannot smoke a cigar. Baby had picked it up in the parking lot at the market. Because this is the literature of ideas, what just happened is a thought. Baby would give the cigar to Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted liked a musician named Sun Ra. He was from outer space. When Baby's father inquired as to where the cigar had come from, the one that Baby had wedged on the tight ledge between head and ear, Baby had the answer. This cigar is from outer space. It was a surprise for Ted from Sun Ra. Wartime surroundings. There were the surroundings Baby had nibbled at, and the plum jam spilled on the surroundings. There were some larded bits of a pie crust baked for her quick, while the giant pie for everybody baked and baked. Baby had heard the word nerve gas and thought that the kitchen smells were nerve gas. They made your nerves stand alert. Baby was running on the fuel of love, skidding to a halt at the kitchen door, then plunging back into the rail-thin kitchen with gusto until she reached some destination, which was erratically determined by the magnitude of her own physical force. The giant pie for everybody, in the meantime, was taking a long time to cook. What if it doesn't come out, she wanted to know? What if something is in there wrecking it? The anticipation was getting on her nerves. She wanted to see it come out now. She had her plans. She was going to give that pie to the fat cats. She'd heard talking about those fat cats out somewhere high-rolling. Baby loved animals and wanted to feed the high-rolling fat cats. She told the tiger she wanted to watch the fat cats eat pie, and why didn't they hurry up? If you don't watch out, you'll be running for president. I hope the fat cats like pie, said Baby. The tiger bit her lip, and a tear rolled down her cheek. You're gonna break my heart. Well, you can have pie too. Baby felt magnanimously toward Tiger, who was as precise with a fork as she was spontaneous with a bag of sugar. What if I told you I was hoping to feed the pie to something scrawny and wild? Asked the Tiger. There aren't any fat cats around here, and that nerve gas, well, isn't really nerve gas. What you smell is a drop of fear sweetened by pie. Smell of pie. When Baby grew up, the smell of pie would sometimes knock her out. I think I'll stop with that, and I'm going to finish with a section from another performance work, which is called Hana Cut In, and it's actually a work that's performed with typewriters. And there's several figures in the piece, but the dominant ones are simply a kind of a presence, a voice, sometimes a surrogate for myself, and my mother, Marion, and Hannah Arendt. And I'm going to read, let's see, Scene with Voice. And so each scene kind of registers some other location that is not existing in the actual environment that we're in, unless, for instance, if we were coincidentally in a museum at the moment. So this scene begins in a museum, Scene with Voice. Is this play about the impossibility of personal experience from the perspective of grand ideas? Or the other way round, the impossibility of big ideas from the perspective of personal experience? The gash between them, gushing with neo-expressionist wishes. Francesco Clemente. I used to work in the other building. Objects above and below the galleries, as well as the administrative dramas, the boardroom strategies and tangles, the ironic sensibilities of some, the earnestness of others. Maybe irony and earnestness are not so indistinguishable. The jangle of these human and institutional dynamics, their mixing together under the pressure of the divergent interests to which the museum responds, were magnified for me in the silence of art. I am visiting this threshold, thinking about something or someone else. It is unclear to me whether it is she or her art that shadows the shaping of this scene. Number 5. I am thinking about Simone's doors. The clay forms are narrow and of unequal height. Their tops lopsided, as if strafed by war or touched by time. They are lined up in descending order. The scaled doors become as musical and temporal as they are spatial and tactile. They hover between concept, story, ancient history, and now between remnant of the passage to a lost interior, a pleasure, a secret, a statelessness. They are indications of the regions of thought that time sculpts through Syrian tragedy and Mesopotamian afterlife, between integral and interval, between progression and procession. The things in the museum condense into an impression that includes vaulted ceilings, microphones, or the disuse of them. Somewhere there may be a painting in which a spiral jets off to the left side of a canvas. Any of these written notes could be sonic cues. Or Hannah cuts in with a vision of ontological roots. Or the notes just hang out where they are like a spiral jutting off to the left of a canvas. This particular spiral possibly doesn't exist, or it is introduced as the name of an African-American artist collective in the 1960s, Spiral. It may signal a painting, a politics, a system, or it devolves as replica, the replica, the replica, with the signature and the microphone and the reverb and the verb. It is often noted that Hannah Arendt didn't have much to say about modern or contemporary art. And this is not a performance about Hannah Arendt, although it depends upon her. Hannah Arendt cuts in and changes things. For example, my mother, who did love art, especially Japanese prints and gardens, was embarrassed about the crisis of everything. So I packed my valises. I was holding them, one in each hand, behind the sofa near where my mother was watching television. The small black one contained the story of my life to date, and the larger one, which you could still tuck under a seat or in a small baggage compartment, held in the other. I wasn't really thinking about this being lopsided. She was watching television in black and white, overview shots of trial room, the tops of heads, man in booth. This becomes Eichmann, seated with two uniformed men, cut to close-up of an attorney in robes, cut to Eichmann in huge spectacles seated between two ununiformed men with a third seated just on the outside of a booth. This becomes Bulletproof. Cut to discussion of men in courtroom, headphones, machines, which become translation machines. Cut to Eichmann guarded, people in the courtroom seated, something in what becomes German. Someone instructs in English to give the voice solid intonation. Don't do any extra work. Don't read it. Solid. Some muffled German. May I have the cut to people in courtroom, a woman in a long wool coat, close-up of attendees, cut to Eichmann and a man in uniform, cut to main man in trial room writing on a pad, silence except the spray of the recording. Shh. My favorite defense of Hannah Arendt's characterization of the new evil is Judith Butler's, who explains it as a new form of hideousness that is able to pass itself off as the normal. As I was saying, a child is the hero of her own life, and I packed up my valises, one black and small, one plum and less small, one with a life story and the other with stuff, seeking the future. I didn't notice much that I was carrying them lopsided.